Her heart leapt with anticipation. Inside, the room was smaller, with rows of ancient tomes and faded newspapers stored haphazardly in boxes. She ran her fingers over the spine of an especially old book, a shiver running down her spine at the strange texture of the leather. Sitting at an old wooden desk in the center of the room was a frail-looking old woman, her gray hair tied back in a tight bun. She looked up slowly when Emily entered, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "I was wondering if you could help me," Emily began. "I'm looking for information on a local legend about the story that no one will tell. The Unnamed." The old woman's expression darkened instantly. "You shouldn't be asking about that." "Please," Emily pressed. "I need to know. I'm a journalist. I'm here to document the town's history." The woman was silent for a long time, her eyes scanning Emily as if weighing her soul. Finally, with a weary sigh, she stood up and shuffled toward one of the shelves in the back. She pulled out a large, dusty volume and handed it to Emily. "This is all that's left, and if you're smart, you'll leave it be." Emily sat down at the desk, her hands trembling as she opened the book. Inside were scattered pages, yellowed with age, covered in writing so old it was barely legible. It seemed to be a collection of journal entries, newspaper clippings, and fragments of what looked like folklore. As she read through them, a picture began to form, a picture of the Unnamed. According to the fragments, the Unnamed was not a person, but a thing, an entity that had no shape, no voice, and no name. It was said to have existed since time immemorial, lurking in the Blackwood forest, feeding off the fear of those who dared to speak its name. It thrived on stories, on the act of telling and retelling. Each time the story was told, it grew stronger, its reach extending beyond the forest and into the minds of the townspeople. The legend said that the Unnamed could only be contained through silence. As long as no one spoke of it, as long as the story remained untold, it would remain dormant, unable to cross the threshold into reality. But the moment someone gave it life through words, it would awaken, and it would come for the one who told the tale. Emily's blood ran cold as she realized why no one in Hollow's End would speak of the legend. They were protecting themselves from something far more ancient and terrifying than she had imagined. She snapped a few photos of the book's pages, her heart racing. As she turned the final page, something slipped out from between the pages. A scrap of paper with a hastily scrawled note. "Do not speak of it. Do not write of it. It lives in the telling." Her throat felt dry as she pocketed the note and closed the book. The library felt colder now, the shadows creeping closer, the silence more oppressive. Emily stood up, ready to leave, but as she turned, the old woman was standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. "You've read too much," the old woman said, her voice shaking. "It knows you now." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You told the story, didn't you? In your mind, as you read, you were telling it. You can't stop it now. It will come for you." Emily's breath quickened. "That's ridiculous. It's just an old myth." The old woman shook her head. "You've already started it. You've given it life." Panic surged through Emily. She pushed past the woman and fled the library, her mind racing. It was absurd, a superstition. She didn't believe it. She couldn't believe it. But as she reached the street outside, the mist had thickened, and the air felt wrong, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The hours blurred together after that. Emily rushed back to her room at the Wounded Raven, locking the door behind her. She sat at her desk, her fingers trembling as she opened her laptop and began typing out her notes. She needed to write this all down before she forgot, before she lost her nerve. As she typed, the words seemed to spill out of her faster than she could control. She wrote about the Unnamed, about the curse of speaking the story, about the old woman's warning. The room around her seemed to darken, the shadows lengthening as though the night itself was creeping in. Suddenly, the lights flickered. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as the air grew colder. The lamp on her desk buzzed, dimmed, and then went out, plunging the room into darkness. She sat frozen, the screen of her laptop casting an eerie glow on her face. A low, whispering sound filled the room. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. But it grew louder, more distinct, a chorus of soft voices murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. The temperature in the room dropped further, her breath coming out in visible puffs of air. She heard it then, a creak, the slow groaning of wood, as something moved in the hallway outside her door. The whispers grew louder, pressing in on her from all sides. She could feel it now, a presence, something watching her from the shadows. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone to call Hank, to call anyone, but there was no signal. Her heart pounded in her ears as the door to her room creaked open, and in the dim light of her laptop, she saw something move, a shadow, darker than the night, creeping closer. It was shapeless, formless, a mass of shifting darkness that seemed to consume the air around it. The whispers became a deafening roar in her ears, and Emily knew, with a sinking dread, that it had found her. She had told the story, and now the unnamed had come to claim her. The next morning, Hank found Emily's room empty, the door ajar. Her laptop was still on the desk, the screen flickering with the last word she had written. It lives in the telling, and in Hollow's End, no one spoke of the story again.